we have a responsibility to each other, and that what unites us is much more important than what divides us. And we should really stress the positive rather than the negative. If we all do our little bit, collectively, we make a giant contribution. We need to work together.
It is time all nations and all people live up to the words of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which recognizes the inherent dignity and equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human race.
Even while dealing with these explicit forms of racism and racial injustice, it's very important to remember to focus on structures and institutions and historical legacies that continue to do the work of reinforcing subordination of groups on the basis of their race, of their ethnicity, of their national origin. And so the first thing I would highlight is ensuring that in the fight for racial justice and for racial equality, we pay as much attention to structures as we do to explicit acts of intolerance.
Behind today's racial violence, systemic racism, and discriminatory policing lies the failure to acknowledge and confront the legacy of the slave trade and colonialism. To build a more solid foundation for equality, we need to better understand the scope of systemic discrimination. We also need to make amends for centuries of violence and discrimination, including through formal apologies, truth-telling processes, and reparation in various forms.
So let's give everybody credit for their contributions to what is a global story. I would love for the United Nations to do a public program on the recognition theme of the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent that would not only be about recognition for people of African descent, but recognition of people of African descent for everyone.
This stunning piece of art represents the permanent memorial in honor of the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade.
Slave castles or prisons awaiting to be taken out, stripped away from their lives and their families and everything they knew through this door of no return, never to return. So the Arc of Return was our attempt to develop a design which allows people to, if they're not able to physically return, at least they can acknowledge the fact that people had suffered great tragic losses and experiences in order to make it possible for our lives to be where we are today.
Finally, it's D-Day, 25th March 2015. The Arc of Return was unveiled for the first time at United Nations headquarters in New York.
So beautifully designed by Mr. Rodney Leon, will stand here at the United Nations headquarters to honor the memory of some 15 million men, women, and children who were forced to cross the Atlantic Ocean in slave ships.
It will remain a permanent fixture here to educate future generations about that tragic event in the history of our world, slavery. The Arc of Return will be a reminder to the leaders of the world who come to the United Nations of their responsibility to prevent tragedies such as the transatlantic slave trade from ever occurring again.
The answer is to preach and practice tolerance, inclusion, and respect for diversity. And this is achieved through greater debate and openness, and the exchange of different views, experiences, and perspectives. And it is achieved through leadership, the kind of leadership admirably shown by Nelson Mandela. Leadership that is courageous enough and principled enough to counter intolerance, racism and discrimination in all its forms. And that is what this organization stands for.
We need to have within the UN an honest conversation on racism. We need to go deeper. I want to listen, to be able to act, and I believe we can take measures, an effective internal discussion on racism, to prepare a plan of action for a one-year debate on racism within the organization. I want this debate to be a clearly open, free-flowing debate without any restriction, to have a chapter on racism in the next staff engagement survey to see if we are able to make progress or not.
If we leave out the African dimension of the Americas, we are leaving out much of the story of the Atlantic world, and we're leaving out much of the story of global civilization, much of what enriched global civilization. And, well, that doesn't seem like the right thing to do. We need to tell everybody's story and how everybody has enriched everybody.